Welcome to my channel. My name is Francois, and today we're making a personal project of mine, a chessboard. Note that this is the first time I'll be using epoxy, so it'll be a mess. It'll be fun to watch. This here is walnut that I'm using for the frame around the chessboard. It's older pieces that I had left over from another project, and you'll see that because they're not finished, the edge is not straight, so there's a gap in it. I don't have a joiner. I've already planed the face of the board, so now I really just to make a straight cut to remove that gap that you see underneath the level. And there's a bunch of jigs that I've seen online, but to me the easiest solution for short pieces like that is just to make a longer fence. So I'm really just adding a 4 feet level, which will allow the board to ride straight along the entire edge of it. If there's one thing I want you to keep in mind is I'm not a professional. I'm very much so a hobbyist, learning with every project. Right now, as I'm narrating this, I find that my fingers are getting awfully close to the blade, which is underneath the board, so it's deceptive. Should get a push block. While we're on the topic of what I'm doing wrong, you'll notice there's a bunch of smoke coming out. I'm cutting too thick for the blade. It's a finishing blade. I shouldn't be using that for this. Here I'm measuring with the tape to ensure that I have the minimum width that I need for the pieces of the frame. Make sense? Now I'm cutting the other side of the pieces. I readjusted the fence off camera just to shave off the edges. Here I'm sure a lot of you seen it coming, but the smoke I had earlier means that the edges are all burnt, so I need to sand that off. I'm clamping all 4 pieces together and just trying to make my life a little easier. And there you go. The problem is fixed. Normally would be the time to round the edge, but for some reason I decided to miter cut first. Shouldn't have done that. It didn't change anything in the end, but I'm risking chipping out when I route the edges, which was unnecessary. So anyway, I'm cutting the bevel cuts here at 45 degrees, and that will allow the frame to come together. Shortly before I decided to make videos, I made a project of a router table. I only have a plunge router, and this table allowed me to make minute adjustment to the height of the bit. I designed the entire thing myself, that's why it probably doesn't look that fancy. With the exception of the gears, which I use a software from Matthias Wendell, which is great by the way. Those of you paying attention, you notice the masking tape on the table. That's because it's very much a work in progress. It's actually the 3rd iteration of that table that I've made. It's not perfect yet, but at that point I had yet to paint it for the logo. typically do 2 passes, one to remove most of the material and the other for the finishing, make sure everything is straight. Ooh, laser cutting. So I'm using the laser to cut the squares so that they're the exact same dimension. I did the dark squares as well as the light square on the laser. The downside is that the edges are burnt. The downside of laser cutting is that the edges are burnt. So the way I clean that is using a plastic brush and water. However, that leaves the wood wet, so I immediately put it in my dehumidifier box, which I've made from scrap wood. Boom! All the squares are glued. And it looks good from a distance. Unfortunately, up close, there are gaps. Which is odd, because I cut everything on the laser cutter, right? Well, as it turned out, the piece that I glued the squares onto was not perfectly flat, of course. So that led to those gaps to form. So the way that I address this is by using a syringe and injecting glue in all the gaps. And once the glue is in the gaps, I just sand over. And for the bigger gaps, I just use my glue bottle, as you can see. Just add some glue, remove the excess, and then hand sand over to make sure the sawdust goes in the crack. And at the very end, I do a few passes with the orbital sander just to smooth everything out. Okay, so here's a fun game for you, listener. Can you pick all the mistakes that I've made? Because there are several. This is my first pour ever, and it'll be a fun watch. First mistake, I'm not wearing gloves. Second mistake, I'm not precisely measuring my pour. Third mistake, look at that pour area. It'll be a mess. I've learned from that a lot. But hey, it's a learning project with decade-old epoxy. So, hey, learning, I think. I'm trying. Anyway, comment below everything you see I'm doing wrong. So that was 2 pours because the first time I didn't mix enough, so I had to add some. And then as you saw, everything overflowed onto the bag and then off the bag and onto the floor of my garage, which is not good. So yeah, a few lessons there. Plan to catch more than a few drips. Maybe use perimeter tapes around the surface that I'm pouring. Also, the torch that I'm using is not made to be used upside down, so it kept shutting off on me. So then I was trying to go fast, and I would burn the epoxy instead of just popping bubbles. The thing is, people say the epoxy love heat, which is true to an extent. If you keep the flame on the epoxy for too long, it will make bubbles, but hard bubbles, and it will just burn it basically. Actually, for too long or too close to the epoxy is bad. So for the third pour, I think, I thought somehow You know what, if I just pour over it without sanding it, maybe I can save it. Terrible idea, doomed to fail, but at least I put some gloves on. And I prep better. Put some tape underneath the board and also masking tape on the edge. And I still didn't measure any better though. You'll notice the hardener on my epoxy is yellow, amber, whatever. That's because it's a decade old. It's way past its shelf life, but it's perfect for a learning project. So that's why I'm using it. As it turned out, the old epoxy was the least of my concerns. It's the one oversight, we'll say, that turned out well. It didn't cause me any problems that I'm aware of, but I've made multiple other mistakes that made that project a lot more complicated and long-lasting than I expected. Yeah. Well, here's where I really started to have some issues with my torch. It's just ridiculous. I was kind of panicking as well because I need to pop those bubbles. I'm not sure how long I have to do so before the epoxy cures. And this is what keeps happening. I thought maybe I was running low on fuel. I switched the bottle, same thing. It just wasn't meant to be used upside down. So little did I know, there are some torch that are made to be used upside down, and some other torch that, while they might work for a little bit, are not made to be used upside down. I'll let you guess which one I have. Yeah, so I could just get a little bit of heat and then it would shut off, or the flame would like almost extinguish. At one point, I realized I'd made too many mistakes and there was just no point in continuing. I would not get a result I'd be happy with. So I made the decision to sand almost all of the epoxy and start over again. This time trying to learn and do a little better. So I mix a much bigger batch this time, and I use my glove to spread the epoxy using the quote pizza sauce method that I've learned online. And it worked out pretty well. I was happy with that. And I also got myself something. And with that, I was back on track. An epic song demands epic results. So here we go. There we go. I hope you enjoyed this, one of my first videos anyway. Um, I forgot to film a bunch of parts, as you probably noticed. I'll try to do better next time for the next project. I'm pretty happy with the result. I don't know if they're epic, but it was my first time um, working with epoxy and doing a chessboard. So, all things considered, I'm happy with how it turned out. If you're still listening at this point, thank you very much for watching. Um, this is a brand new channel, so hopefully, if you like the content, you can leave me a like, and eventually, when you feel like I deserve it, maybe subscribe. That would go a long way. Thank you very much. Have a great day.